In the context of our general module, can I be a Christian and successful in business? That is, can I succeed as a Christian, morally speaking especially, and also succeed as a business person, financially speaking? In the context of that module, we are today and throughout this week, covering a kind of a mini module on Christian ethics and globalization. Okay, so what are the responsibilities of Christian business persons vis-a-vis the fact of globalization? Yes?
Will the material that we're covering today and Thursday be on the exam?
Yes.
Okay.
The material today will be.
Today.
Today will be, yes.
Thank you.
And if you open up your text to page 185, the Griffiths article, we can begin to find here some of the materials we need in order to navigate the complex relationships of globalization and the moral implications of globalization, especially for those of us who intend to go into business and live a life in business that is morally successful. Okay, so let's quickly think about what globalization is, and I'm making huge generalizations here. Globalization is a phenomenon that has been taking place for a number of decades now. It takes place in fits and starts. It is characterized by closer communications, so better communications technologies are a key characteristic of globalization. It's also characterized by low tariffs or no tariffs. So free trade is a frequent characteristic of globalization. The recent administration that was ousted from office this fall was opposed to free trade for a variety of reasons, but the core reason being that their key demographic, the industrial belt workers in the Midwest in America, lost their jobs as a result of processes of globalization due to free trade. So the administration, the Trump administration is what I'm referring to, were advocates of tariffs and of various barriers, protectionist measures against free trade. Globalization, though, that may turn out to be a blip on the radar. There are lots of anti-globalization forces, to be sure, in America. They may get elected again. The current administration is pro-globalization. Globalization has been moving forward over the last few decades, and that has meant lower to no trade barriers. Okay. Also characteristic of globalization is outsourced supply chains. So because of the low or no trade barriers, MNCs, multinational companies that are domiciled here in the United States or in Europe will outsource their supply chains, their factories where they assemble their electronics or where they assemble garments, the apparel factories or maybe shoe factories, whatever the case may be. They will outsource their supply chains to the developing world where they can find cheaper labor than they can here in the United States. And that means labor that is not backed by strong worker protections, worker protection laws. It means labor that often doesn't know how to unionize. It means labor that often is relatively uneducated in terms of its know-how of how to negotiate with management. And MNCs like this a lot because it makes the supply chain massively cheaper. Okay, in fact, it has gotten to the point these days where you often cannot compete in an industry unless you are outsourcing your supply chain, because the margin costs are too great when all your competitors are outsourcing their supply chains. Other characteristics of globalization include things like the spread of Western values. Okay, often that means political values, so the spread of Western democratic-style elections, or at least the appearance of democratic-style elections. A lot of countries in the world now hold elections that aren't real elections, but they do it because that gives them a kind of a legitimacy, because that's kind of become the thing to do these days due to the spread of Western values. Often also it has included, outside of business and economics, it has included the spread of Western entertainment options, Western style music and videos, but we're not going to focus on those aspects of globalization in this lecture. Okay, all of these things are characteristics of globalization. If you look on page 188, we find some criticisms of globalization from an ethical point of view. So certainly there are some great advantages of globalization, and we'll talk about those in a minute, but there are some disadvantages as well, and we'll start with some objections to these processes. I'm looking on this in the second column on page 188. The more common criticisms made of globalization are the following. This is Griffith's 188 and Beyond Integrity. Okay, do we have our books? Yes, yes. Yours is on your Kindle. Okay, we're good. Okay, good. Thank you, folks. The rules of the game governing globalization are biased towards the rich countries and against poor countries. It has undermined democracy in developing countries because it has compromised their sovereignty in key areas. It is facilitating an apparent environmental crisis. More on that later. It is not a win-win situation as the process creates losers in developed as well as developing countries. It has forced governments of developing countries to implement policies such as privatization, liberalization, and the removal of capital controls which have been inappropriate and damaging. Let's think about those and keep those on the table. You could read the rest of that list on your own. I want to list here some demographic groups. We can think about them together. Winners and losers from processes of globalization. Who are winners and losers? Let me start us off, and then I'll ask you guys to contribute and add some demographic groups, if you would, please. Winners, American consumers, or Western first world consumers as such. Okay, Rebecca's a winner. Okay, Diana's a winner. Daniel's a winner. Riley's a winner because you guys get products much more cheaply than you otherwise would get them due to supply chains being outsourced in developing countries where the cost of the supply chain is much lower. That cost gets passed on to the consumer, and there's no damage to business margins because the supply chain is so much cheaper than it would be if the apparel that you're wearing was actually made in the United States. Okay, actually, let's take just a minute and think about that. Wonder if we can just do this in a socially distanced way. In a socially distanced fashion, help your neighbor out. Turn to your neighbor and say, "Hi, neighbor." And now, if you can, in a socially distanced fashion, look at your neighbor's tag on his or her shirt and tell your neighbor where his or her shirt comes from. Shout out some of the places where your garments come from. China? Pretty typical. Yeah, where does it come from? Yeah, what country? Made in what?
Vietnam, China, Mexico, Venezuela, anywhere. That's not America.
Good. Lesotho? Is that where your shirt's from? Lesotho is in South Africa. It's a small little country that's between South Africa and Mozambique. You can Google it sometime. Yeah, it's really small. Really small. Okay, does anyone have a shirt made in America? Does anyone have a shirt made in Japan? Does anyone have a shirt made in Europe? The answer is no to all of these questions, right? We overwhelmingly have shirts and sweatshirts that come from Bangladesh. What's that? Eastern Europe?
Yeah,
Sometimes.
you get them from like Bolivia or somewhere like that.
Yeah, sometimes they're countries that are sort of marginal, like Western countries, like Hungary or Poland or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, but you can still find cheap labor there in Romania or if you go to Hungary. Yeah, guys, we can't find American shirts. Our shirts are from Bangladesh, they're from Indonesia, they're from Vietnam. It is because it is much, much cheaper for workers there to assemble these garments than for workers here to do so, or to oversee the machines that assemble the garments, okay? All right, so you guys are winners because you got your shirts for a fraction of the price you would have to pay if it weren't for this outsourced labor. Okay, that's one winner demographic group. What's a loser group?
The working force.
Okay, expand on that a little bit for us.
Because
outsourcing to other countries, there's less jobs in America.
Okay, so American workers, is it all American workers though?
There's
Blue
just no
collar,
playing work.
lower educated people.
Okay, American workers with skills that get outsourced. They are the losers in this.
I would probably say low skilled workers.
Oh, careful with that. There's some very skilled machinists, very skilled coal miners, very skilled steel workers. Yeah, it's just like different skills. Different skills. There are actually some really skilled people who do those jobs. But yeah. So a lot of American jobs have moved overseas from certain kinds of industries, and I mean especially, classic Rust Belt style industries. The car making in Detroit. I mean the coal mining in West Virginia. I mean the steel plants in Pittsburgh. These all have moved overseas. Okay, and so American workers who once had skills, maybe still have these skills, can no longer get jobs in these industries. Okay, recently Joe Biden was asked at a press conference what his advice was for workers of that kind, and his answer was learn to code. Okay, this is a rather insensitive answer to offer in a press conference, and he got pilloried for it, as he should have. But basically the response of the pro-globalization people is, look, if you are a worker whose job can be done more cheaply elsewhere than in your own country, then you need to find another skill set. Okay? I'm not sure if that's a good response or a bad response. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute. Okay, other loser groups or winner groups.
For winner groups, the companies that are outsourcing.
Yeah, absolutely. MNCs make a lot more, especially the MNCs. Small American companies don't have this the infrastructure and know-how to be able to outsource things, but big companies do, and the execs make a lot more. The middle management makes a lot more. Heck, the retail level employees can make more as a result of the better margins that the company gets due to the forces of globalization that the company is harnessing. Okay, excellent. That's absolutely right. What's another winner or loser group?
Would the supplier be one?
Okay, how so? Supply as a winner or a loser group?
Loser?
Okay, how so?
Because they are producing a product at a cheaper rate than it could be sold.
Okay, yeah, all right. Let's think about that for just a minute. Okay, now there's a lot of controversy about this one. Okay, are the developing world workers better off or worse off than they otherwise would be? It's a pretty controversial question, and we're going to think about like the aspects of that here for a minute.
I was thinking that supplier could actually become
I think management in suppliers almost always are winners.
okay.
But the developing world workers, it's controversial whether they are winners or losers. I would like to make the case that they, on balance, generally lose more often than they win. Okay, although I'm gonna, in a minute after I make that case, I'm gonna tell you guys that there's also a case to be made for them winning from this process. Okay, but let me put them in the loser column for now. Okay, developing world workers who work in the factories where they assemble the products more cheaply than American workers could do. Okay, let me give you an illustration of this. I will now, I will attempt to draw China. Okay, so there we are, right? Okay, it looks kind of like that, right? Like that. There's Hainan, right? Hong Kong, Beijing,
Are you
Shanghai.
China?
What's that?
You do China?
Yeah, this is China.
Oh, I thought you were doing America.
It looks like America.
Well, see, you got like a little bit on like the top right with the New York, New Jersey. I was wondering if you're still gonna do Florida with the Panhandle down there.
Dude, like, you're being insensitive enough already. Okay, no. Okay, so let's take your average Chinese worker. We will call her Li Mingha. Okay, Li Mingha is a worker in Shenzhen. Shenzhen is a city, a booming startup city that has grown from almost nothing now to nearly 15 million people. It is on the border with Hong Kong. She works in an electronics manufacturing facility in Shenzhen, okay, making, I don't know, iPhone components or something similar. Okay, she has moved there from her family farm. Okay, her parents still live on the family farm. Let's say they live up near Xi'an, right? Okay, she has moved to Shenzhen and she works and in the factory, lives in a dormitory there, and works 6 days a week. She's allowed some time off. Her conditions are relatively poor, her working conditions. Okay, the food is poor. She has lodging. Okay, most of the time in these kinds of situations, it's not like people are being actively physically harmed. It's just there are poor working conditions in most of these situations. Okay, she works long hours. Her pay is very, very low. Her pay is so low, in fact, that it gives her almost nothing in terms of discretionary income or the ability to save anything, but it does enable her to support herself in these circumstances. Okay, sometimes in more radical kinds of situations, like what I'm describing, you'll see fences around the factories, dogs patrolling, some sorts of intimidation tactics to keep the workers there, but most of the time, the workers are there voluntarily. Okay, here's a question for you guys. Why does Li Minghe stay? Why does she stay in this working arrangement, assuming she's not physically coerced? What's in it for her? Why does she stay? Lack of options. Yeah, okay. She doesn't have anything else that she could do that would be better. What did her grandparents do? Daniel?
Can I answer since I'm from there?
Yeah, man. What part of China are you
I
from?
have like a weird advantage on this right now.
Sure. What part of China are you from originally?
I'm from the northeast.
Okay.
City called Dalian.
Oh, yeah, I know where that is. It gets really cold there, man.
Not too cold, but it's definitely colder than Houston.
A lot colder than Houston. Okay, go for it. Answer why does she stay and talk about what her grandparents did.
Well, let's say she really moved from Xi'an, which is like about a couple hours west of Beijing. Although Beijing is the capital, but outside of the capital is pretty much like in that area you get fields in the mountains, which is like the worst condition you can grow crops.
For sure. Yep.
So since they have fields there, which probably means that they're in the rural areas of China.
Right.
It's very likely that they have been there for generations.
That's correct.
So probably her parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents have been there and they've been farmers or
That's right.
raising cattle for their whole life.
That's right.
And she moved to Shenzhen for the reason that there is this factory for electronics, let's say Foxconn,
Right.
which is where iPhones produced. And it's for the reason is that Shenzhen is a bigger city. There's more people that she's likely to meet.
Mhm.
There's more opportunities for her to people say break the barrier of being poor. And
Sure.
Farmers usually are considered as the poor people in China.
Yep, that's right.
So they likely to break the barrier there and then have an actual life in Shenzhen since it is a tier 1 city like LA or New York here in America.
Sure. Yeah. The lure of the city has brought her there. The reality is something she didn't necessarily always consider. Okay? If you think about LA, you immediately think glitz. You don't think the rundown buildings of Watts in inner city LA or something like that. So that's probably part of why she's there. Keep going.
But yeah, so also since you said it is a she, it is likely for her to meet someone that has a better family background than where she is in Xi'an, because that's say it's the countryside. If she's likely to meet countryside people, then in the actual city, she's probably going to meet someone.
The lure of better opportunities in terms of marital prospects and various things. Yeah.
And also since the company provides lodging, like you said, let's say most likely it's a sweatshop at this point.
Mm-hmm. That's probably true.
They will probably be working from 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. at nighttime.
Probably so.
They get paid about say $1 to $5 per hour.
$5 is a little much.
Maybe 3.
3 even would be high. More likely would be 1 to 2, $1 to $2
Three
an
would
hour.
probably be like a shop manager kind of deal, but like on average for like a one person who works on the line, it's probably around $1.
Good. Yeah. No, all this is correct. So her grandparents were subsistence farmers. Maybe they were rice farmers. Okay. And she wants a better life. And also her grandparents, I mean, honestly, they think it would be better for their daughter, parents, grandparents, the daughter, granddaughter, to go to the city to look for something better. Once she is in the city, though, why doesn't she go back to something else if it's not what she hoped for? Probably the answer is that the subsistence farming that her parents and grandparents have done for generations does not offer a standard of living that is especially good at this point. Think about it for a second. Think about subsistence farmers in China or wherever, Suppose you, in the past, always farmed rice, and you took your rice to market where you sold it, and with the proceeds that you got from your rice, you then obtained other life necessities. Okay, maybe heating oil, maybe you got food, maybe you got farm equipment, etc. Okay, but you can now no longer do that as a result of globalization. The reason why is because you are now, as a subsistence rice farmer, competing against all sorts of farming conglomerates all over the world that can farm for a fraction of the cost that you can farm for. And so your rice doesn't fetch at the market what it used to fetch a generation or two ago. So these subsistence level farmers have seen their standard of living go down. She can't go back to Xi'an to the family farm because the family farm, honestly, is a declining operation that won't be able to support those family farmers for much longer. Much less her. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So she's got to stay in Shenzhen, and she's got to work on that factory line and stay in the dormitory, hope that she meets a young man who maybe has better prospects than she does. It's not an especially good situation for her, to be honest. Okay? It's probably best to say that she is a loser in this process. Now, I want to say, though, on behalf of MNCs and Forces of Globalization, that there are good things that are coming about as a result of her being in that factory and doing electronics assembly work in Guangzhou or wherever she is, okay? What's coming about? Well, business connections are being established. Capital is being pumped into the local economy. Infrastructure is being built. Roads are coming. Various other prosperity-producing mechanisms are arriving from more prosperous parts of the world. And so while she herself, in the moment right now, might be a loser, arguably her country, right, Guangzhou, right, China as a whole, let me spell this right, her country is winning from this arrangement because it is getting all sorts of much needed business infrastructure capital connections to more prosperous parts of the world, which will ultimately, a generation or two hence, raise the standards of living that the citizens of the country can enjoy. Okay, case in point. Just off the coast of China is this is Japan.
Pretty accurate.
Pretty accurate?
Pretty accurate, actually.
Dude, thanks. I appreciate that, man. Okay, so there's Japan. Japan back in the day, following the war, 50s and 60s, they made little tchotchkes. They made all sorts of baubles and other various different, like tchotchke style metals and stuff, cheapo electronics, and they learned from that, and infrastructure was built from that, and very, very quickly they became an industrial powerhouse. Okay, and nowadays Japan makes the best cars, Japan makes extraordinary high-tech type stuff, and they do a lot of the planning, which is the real power in the tech world. And so Japan is an example of a country that went through painful processes of worker exploitation to ultimately arrive at a much better overall level of prosperity as a result of the kind of process that Lee Ming-ha and her similar workers like her are going through. Now that's kind of hard to say to Lee Ming-ha, right? So you say to her, well, I'm sorry that you've got to work on the assembly line in bad conditions right now, but your grandchildren are going to be a lot better off because you're putting in the time. Okay, that's hard to make that case. It's hard to make that case. And quite frankly, the American MNC, maybe it's Apple, maybe it's something else, that negotiated with the local electronics manufacturer to get its contract for electronics manufacturing, they don't give a rip about Lee Ming-ha. Okay, they are looking for the weakest, most vulnerable possible worker who will do this job for the cheapest possible price. Lee Ming-ha is competing against every single other worker in the world, since the MNC will go wherever it can get this done most cheaply. Okay, that's why she has to work for so little. Okay, so the immediate workers might be losers, but the countries that they are a part of often are winners. Let me pause and ask if there are any comments so far before we talk about the ethics of these ideas. So yes.
So this one is actually a true story of my friend's dad who works at something.
Okay.
And I mean, it might be different town to town in India, but where's like the programmers are mostly in India and stuff. But rather than, and I think because we can use like the cultural things for payment, because like the people in India, instead of raising their salary, what they actually valued more is having a car ride back home in a fancy car.
Mm-hmm.
And to Slumberjay, that is like so much cheaper.
So they bought him off with that.
Yes.
Wow, no way.
Because apparently for them, that really shows off their status. That,
Mhm.
hey, I work for Slumberjay as a programmer.
Sure.
Even though obviously you guys are not earning that much compared to if that programmer was in the US.
Right.
But they just wanted that car ride because the whole village could see that you come home in a fancy car ride.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so like I feel like in that case, I don't know Indian names, but whatever, I'm just gonna call him Tommy. He's obviously not Tommy, but
Okay.
or Raj. I don't know.
Okay.
But he's I feel like he's not a loser in that case, even though it's like developing world workers, because what he wanted was that social status.
Sure.
And I mean, Slumberjay is happy that they don't have to pay like that much monetary thing, because they're just using the same car and getting these people off, and just people are loving it.
Sure. So absolutely. So look, subsistence level farming is not very prosperous at all. In fact, it's brutal, back-breaking work most of the time, and that's what humans have been for generations. The great majority of humans have been subsistence farmers for generations. So for a lot of these workers, honestly, going back to the subsistence farming is, I mean, it's not possible for them at this point, but pretty much anything else might be not any better, but it's not subsistence farming, right? So there are advantages to going to the city and to working in the factory, and maybe it's status, maybe that's the way the MNCs buy them off, or maybe there are other things that you can do, like you find an opportunity that you didn't otherwise have. There was actually, I don't know if you guys are into literature, but there were a whole bunch of great American novels written about this phenomenon of the worker going to the city and working in the factory and finding out that it's not what she thought it was. Written back around the turn of the last century, not the 21st, but the 19th to 20th century. I could definitely recommend some to you. So The Jungle by Upton Sinclair is great. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser, about a woman who goes and gets pregnant at the factory and she's got to deal with that situation. There are a bunch of other terrific novels about this kind of a phenomenon, which happened in America about 100 years ago and is now happening in the developing world for workers there. Okay, I've listed 3 here. Let me list one other loser group here. Local culture advocates. This is a little more complex to wrap our minds around. When American values go to developing world countries, they displace local culture. Okay, so the kids are more into American movies, American music. They don't care about local customs. Okay, the mom and pop shops close up. The Walmart moves in. Okay, local culture in general gets displaced and even shut down. And that means language too, a lot of the time. Okay, so the kids don't want to speak the language that their parents spoke because they see it as lacking in status. They would prefer to speak the cool, hip language of English, which is associated with the Hollywood stars and looks, it looks trendy, right? That's what they want. Okay, so local cultures get destroyed by globalization. Now, when Walmart comes in, that means low prices for goods that come from all over the world. So they didn't have that before. That's an advantage. They can get a vacuum cleaner for real cheap now. But it means it comes at the expense of the community that had been built around the mom and pop shop or the local affiliations that once were a part of their infrastructure as a people group. Okay, so local cultural advocates are also losers. Let us look at the Wydick article and begin to think about these processes of globalization from the perspective of Christian ethics. What are we as Christians supposed to think about these phenomena? How are we supposed to approach them? Okay, if you look at the Wydick article on page 199, Wydick writes, I would like to consider economic globalization from the standpoint of 3 major principles that run throughout the scriptures. The objective being to help us as Christians to think more clearly and critically about globalization and to consider our roles in the midst of it. Okay, the first biblical principle is that God clearly cares about the poor and about the response of the rich to the poor among them. Okay, I've mentioned this in class before, so I won't spend too long on it, but if you just, peruse the Christian scriptures, even a cursory inspection, you can find all over concern for the poor, concern for the impoverished. To the extent that an MNC or a company is investing in the local community to try to elevate the prosperity of the local workers, they are doing good by the standards of Christian ethics. To the extent that they are extracting from those local communities worker hours without any reinvestment or real long-term commitment to those local communities because they just want to use the workers, they're acting in a way that is inconsistent with the biblical view of the poor and of how we should treat the poor. Okay, so again, there are goods and bads here, and I think that you can defend Western companies outsourcing their supply chains if those Western companies manifest a commitment to the local communities in Indonesia or Vietnam or wherever and decide to make those communities better than when they found them. Okay, but you cannot defend globalization practices on a biblical basis, at least, where MNCs do shakedowns, and when the factory is finished, they just leave a derelict building and move on with no actual investment in the community infrastructure. Okay, so that would be my take on the issue of the impoverished. The second biblical principle is that interdependence between people is a community ideal. Okay, this kind of speaks for itself. Relationality is a good thing. It is good for people to be connected to each other. hey guys, having commerce between nations massively decreases the prospect of warfare or of conflict between those nations. And that's a good thing. From the perspective of Christian ethics, having regular commercial interaction and relation going on around the world massively decreases the prospects of conflict and increases peace. And that's a really good thing. Okay, that's probably what's going to save America and China from going to war with each other, is the incredible interrelation of commerce that we have now. Even though these are the two big powers in the world, they can make it together if they continue to increase their commercial relations. Daniel.
See, you said how this is going to prevent any type of conflicts.
Yes.
But what's funny is as soon as Trump came up, conflict started.
Mm-hmm.
As we saw the trade war and the terrorists raising up on each side and going
Sure.
crazy.
Absolutely.
But like I think as like like obviously Trump was thinking that China was kind of ripping off on America,
Mm-hmm.
and China obviously was not agreeing with that allegation, and then so which is why Trump added a bunch of tariffs on a lot of things, which makes China to pay extra, and then China was
Sure.
like, yeah, we're not going to be soft with you too, so we add a bunch of tariffs. And right now we're leaving with like a weird situation is that prices of things are going up. Farmers and the developing workers, or like the lower people, the farmers who are exporting things,
Mhm.
they have to pay extra because China is not paying for tariffs. And
Correct. Yes.
China is not paying for tariffs, so like that extra money has to be paid by the suppliers that here in America that's exporting the things.
Right.
Which means right now it's like I guess you can say
Much of it is. The costs are actually shared to some extent, but I agree with what you're saying. Yes.
yeah, but I think what I'm trying to say is like sometimes it can also be the lead to conflicts.
Oh, okay,
You
okay.
understand what I'm saying?
Okay, sure. Yes, good point. Right, so without a doubt, this last administration in the United States dramatically increased conflict with China. But notice that the reason why conflict increased is because they were trying to make obstacles to trade with the tariffs and the protectionist measures.
Yeah, okay.
The free trade that had been, probably ripping off some Americans, yes, but also, helping in a lot of ways too. The free trade generally leads to much closer relational connections between countries, and that's what I'm saying decreases conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Honestly, guys, if you look in history, liberal democracies don't go to war with each other. Okay, they haven't ever gone to war with each other. No liberal democracy has ever gone to war with another liberal democracy. A major reason for that is commerce. Major reason for that is because of commercial relations and connections built across cultural differences that help peoples understand each other in more effective ways. Okay, just something to think about. That's a constructive thing from the perspective of Christian ethics. Okay, the third biblical principle is that God is not a patriot. God loves and cares for people from all nations.
Where's this again?
This is page 199, the Wydick article. Okay, God loves and cares for people from all nations. Here's Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, for all are one in Christ Jesus. Make disciples of all nations, Matthew 28:19, etc. Okay. So on the basis of those general biblical principles, Wydick goes on to try to drill down into particular kinds of issues in globalization and to offer us some guidance. Now, I actually kind of think I do disagree with Wydick on a couple issues. We'll talk about that after the break. But I think it's really good to look at this methodology as an approach for us as we go into business. You take general purpose biblical principles, and then you make a sincere effort to try to apply them to contemporary issues in the way that Wydick is doing. Okay, I'm going to take the Wydick article, and after the break, I'm going to talk about comparative advantage. Let's take a 2 or 3 minute break, and then when we come back, we'll look on page 200 and talk about what's driving all this globalization, the principle of comparative advantage. Okay, let's take a quick break. Okay, let's look at the Wydick article on page 200, and we're going to talk about what is driving the mechanisms of globalization that I have described, and what the ethics of that happen to be. Okay, so I'm talking in particular about comparative advantage. I think there's probably some familiarity with this concept, yes? Have you guys gotten this from World of Business?
Oh yeah.
Yeah? Okay, maybe some of us know about it? Okay, all right, well, at any rate, I'm not sure if there's general familiarity. So if you look on page 200, second column, actually bottom of the first column, the basis for exchange then is in harnessing relative differences in people's productivity between various economic activities. For example, suppose you are both a very good computer programmer and a very good lawnmower. You can earn $20 per hour building web pages. Alternatively, you could mow your lawn, which would take you 1 hour. Suppose the cost of my time is only $5 per hour, but it would take me 2 hours or twice as long to mow your lawn as it would for you. Okay, however, it would take me forever to design a web page because my technical skills are low and I don't know how. Okay, and then it'll go on to describe that. Actually, let me just put this up on the board. I think we'll understand it more effectively if I just put this up on the board rather than reading from the text. Okay, so Sohi and Riley are both workers. Okay, they are looking at two different tasks. ML for mowing lawns, CP for computer programming. Okay, so he can mow lawns at the rate of, I don't know, $20 an hour. Anybody have a lawn mowing business in high school? Kinda. I mowed lawns in high school. Okay. Lawn mowing actually is not bad because the homeowners don't want to do it, and it's often hot work, and so you actually get pretty good work for unskilled labor. I'm sorry, pretty good wages for unskilled labor. Okay, so he gets $20 an hour mowing lawns. So he can also program computers, but she's not very good. $15 an hour. Okay. Riley is a better lawnmower than Sohi. $35 an hour. But as good a lawnmower as Riley is, Riley can program computers at $100 an hour. Sorry, Sohi. Okay, so what should Riley do and what should Sohi do? If you got to divide up the tasks and everybody only has a finite amount of time, Riley should program computers and Sohi should mow lawns?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so Riley is like the American worker working for Apple in Cupertino, California, programming the software that is put as an operating system on the Apple phones. Okay, and Sohi is like the electronics assembly line worker. Okay, and honestly, this is the most efficient thing, at least in theory. Let me describe this theory for you guys for a minute. In theory, comparative advantage benefits everyone because everybody gets the most that they could possibly get if they do what they have a comparative advantage in. By comparative advantage, I mean an advantage relative to what you could otherwise do. So relative to your other options, you have an advantage in X, Y, Z. Relative to her other options, the Honduran garment worker has an advantage in assembling shirts. Okay, relative to Riley's other options, she has an advantage in computer programming. Now, when everybody does what they have a relative advantage in, a general social efficiency is achieved. This is the theory, at least. And the prosperity of the whole is benefited. Because we are each doing what we are most capable of doing relative to our other opportunities. The society as a whole would be much worse off if Sohi programmed computers and Riley mowed lawns. The society as a whole is much better off, is the theory here. Now, in practice, like I've mentioned with Li Mingha, it doesn't work out that way a lot of the time. Because what happens is the worker who's got a comparative advantage in unskilled labor often gets exploited. Okay, that is the practical reality. But in theory, at least, it benefits everyone. Okay, now if you look at the Wydick article at the bottom of page 201, Wydick writes, the winners, this is the first column, the winners in the typical pattern of today's economic globalization include consumers in both rich and poor countries and workers who possess skills that are associated with the country's actual or potential exports. The losers in the typical pattern of today's economic globalization essentially consist of one group, Wydick says, workers who possess skills that are associated with a country's actual or potential imports. Okay, those are the steel workers in Pittsburgh, the auto workers in Detroit, the coal miners in West Virginia. Wydick goes on to write, the pain of the relatively small group of losers from trade is more sharply felt than the gain of the larger number of winners. As a result, the voice of the losers is disproportionately factored into the formulation of trade policy. Okay, so Wydick thinks that basically the workers who have skills in jobs that got outsourced, they need to learn to code. That's what Wydick thinks, at least. And he thinks that the pain that they feel, while real, is pain that can be overcome if they change their lives and their professions. Okay, but Wydick also makes this claim at the bottom of page 201 that when we think about financial allocation decisions as business executives or middle management, that we need to actually go where the need is greatest. And globalization will show us how to do that, he says. Okay, so let me just read here. This is a jarring sentence. Wydick writes at the bottom of page 201, Buy America campaigns are inconsistent with the biblical view of justice. On the contrary, because workers in other countries are poorer than even the poorest of our displaced workers, we should welcome new opportunities that arise for workers in the developing countries while supporting a strong social safety net and generous retraining and educational programs for our own displaced workers at home. So basically what Wydick is saying there is that if there's somebody in the 3rd Ward here in Houston who is in need, and somebody in, I don't know, Congo in Africa who is in need, and you've got a limited amount of financial capital that you can put towards building a job, you should take it to the place where there's greatest need. And that is Congo in Africa. Because honestly, although there is poverty in the 3rd world, it's not like developing world poverty, is what Wydick is saying. Okay, and I don't mean to minimize the poverty in American inner cities, but that is Wydick's opinion. I'm actually not sure if I agree with Wydick on this particular topic. My own intuition is that, well, I don't know. What do you guys think? So if you got $100, and you can only give it to one place, do you give it to help poverty relief in Houston, or do you give it to help poverty relief in Congo? Like, what is your intuition on that? I don't think that there's a biblically right or wrong answer here. You'd say Houston? I would agree with you, actually. But others?
Well, but I think it's a little different reason than the book, because like Houston has a lot of diverse people, so I like the fact that I can help a little bit of everybody.
Sure. Sure. Okay. Yeah.
I would say Congo, but basically it's just how I think is that the poor people in Houston lives a better life than the poor people in Congo.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
I don't dispute that. I agree with you.
It is true.
I agree with you.
Like here, like say like a homeless person here in Houston, they can find like probably like a tent or a dumpster or something, and they go hide underneath it.
And they can get a government relief check, and they have other social safety net options. I agree with you.
And then there's people like government, like social workers will come out and help them in cases. But in Congo, literally like a couple years back, they were still having a civil war.
Right.
And based on that, and then the people like they can suffer from no electricity, no water, no any health care, or any
Oh yeah, it's terrible poverty, terrible poverty.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So, like,
absolutely.
the poor people here in Houston lives a better life than poor people in Congo. So
Yeah, okay.
they need more help.
I get that case. I totally get it. I guess the reason why I would give the $100 here in Houston is because it's my community, and my first responsibility is towards those who are near me in my community. That would be my intuition.
Yeah.
I mean, they're part of the same political structure. My immediate concerns of justice ought to be towards them. It's like, it's like somebody in your family is in need. Like, you're the first person who should be caring for them rather than somebody else. I don't know. I guess that's why my intuition would be a little different on that. It's like competing principles that are hard to reconcile. Yeah. Good. Okay, good, guys. Let me go ahead and load this case study for us. By the way, the U.S. government actually subsidizes some industries where it would make more sense economically for us to outsource them. For instance, farming. American corn farmers and soybean farmers, their jobs could be done much more cheaply in the developing world if we just imported all of our food. Why do you think the American government subsidizes our farmers? Even though they're doing so is inefficient from an economic perspective. Does anybody know?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so farming is an example of a job that should be outsourced because it would be cheaper to do elsewhere. But the U.S. government keeps it stateside and subsidizes our farmers, even though they're doing jobs that honestly would be more efficiently done in developing countries. Why do you think we do that?
Should be like a backwards of things in case relations also don't work out and issues with shipping, charges, food.
Good. Yeah, so the answer is national security reasons. Okay, so for instance, if the U.S. were ever to go to war, you can't just start up a farming program in 6 months or even a year, right? It's like years and years has to be an ongoing thing. So you don't want to get into a situation where you're dependent upon the country that you're at war with or whatever. So we actually do subsidize certain industries that don't make sense from an economic perspective. Okay, let's talk about Apple. Everybody's familiar with this company. This is one of the world's most powerful and influential companies these days, a legendary company. Sorry, the screen's kind of.
that.
Oh, this is the first personal computer.
Oh, it's not.
This is an extraordinary, revolutionary object. This probably could, if you were to buy that at an auction, it would probably be hundreds of millions. It's like a treasured thing now. Okay, founded by Jobs, Wozniak, and Wayne in 1976. They originally sold personal computer kits. Now they sell phones, computers, tablets, speakers, watches. The next frontier for them is wearables, although they've had some difficulty getting wearables off of the ground. Does anybody have an iWatch? Got one here, another here. Okay, a third. All right, so iWatches are selling. They're just not wildly popular like the iPhones are.
What are wearables? Are those watches?
The Google Glasses are wearables. The iWatch is kind of a semi-wearable.
Fitbits, something like that.
The Fitbits, yeah, those are wearables, yeah. They have a cult-like following among millennials and among the culture more generally, right? So in a lot of social circles, if you don't have an iPhone, you're nothing, right? You gotta have status, and Apple gives you that. It's a luxury brand that is very powerful. Perceived by its users to have more reliable devices than its competitors. Okay, Apple also continually develops apps and content for its users to keep them hooked. They're really big on forcing you into the ecosystem. Okay, so they intentionally make it difficult for their own devices to communicate or connect with other devices outside of the Apple ecosystem. I mean, heck, they even go so far as to give you designated chargers where you only have a charger for an Apple product and it doesn't work for anybody else because they want to force you into the Apple ecosystem. It keeps you paying if you do that. Okay, they increase their prices on their products every year. Their prices are really high. iPhone 10 retails for $1,000, but iPhone 12 is much more expensive.
They're starting to go even further by not even including chargers when you buy the phone.
I know. Yeah. Like this company is so powerful, and honestly, they've gotten pretty arrogant. They think they can just do anything, and the consumers will pay. Which maybe they're right. Maybe they will.
Different chargers for different
Different charges for different Apple devices. I don't know. Apple was the first company to release the smartphone as we know it. Okay, a revolutionary product, obviously. Revolutionized the music industry with the iPod and iTunes. The R&D spend from this company is bigger than the market caps of many Fortune 500 companies. They introduced fingerprint scanners. Other characteristics, they're regularly embroiled in lawsuits with Samsung and other electronics manufacturers over copyright infringement. So, for instance, they and Samsung hate each other. Okay, they both steal from each other. They both have spies in each other's corporate hierarchy. And they both claim that only the other side is stealing. Okay. Great worker benefits, great medical, dental, and 401k. Excellent training. Discounts on Apple products. High starting salaries. Meaningful work in making products that are used by millions. Their worker benefits are terrific if you are an Apple corporate employee or an Apple retail employee. Okay, but not, of course, as we'll talk in a minute, if you are an outsourced worker. Okay, Apple in the community. Apple was not always a company that gave back to the community. For instance, under Steve Jobs, they didn't give anything. Jobs was a total jerk. Okay, he was a brilliant jerk, but he's a total jerk. Okay, didn't ever give anything in charity. He thought it was inefficient, by the way. Which it is, right? But that's not why you give to charity. You don't give to charity for efficiency reasons. You give because you're compassionate. Okay, in Cook's first year as CEO, the company donated $50 million to Stanford Hospital, $50 million to African aid organizations. They've done a lot for housing in California, their home state. They give a lot of money to community charitable projects now. Okay, let's talk about the scandals. There are bones in the closet. Big skeletons in the closet for Apple. Apple, for instance, has recently been caught throttling their customers. This means secretly using product updates to sabotage customers' iPhone processors. Apple has said that its reason for doing this is because of battery flaws that could cause customer phones to shut down. Okay, so that is the ostensible reason for the throttling. However, critics allege that Apple's real motivation is to slow down its customers' iPhones, to force its customers to upgrade their phones more rapidly. Okay, so Apple only makes money if people are on a kind of a regular merry-go-round cycle of continually updating their iPhones. And to be honest, the iPhone is not doing a whole lot now that the iPhone 2 generations ago didn't already do. Maybe the camera is a little bit more granular. Maybe the graphics are a little bit cooler on the video games, but the functionality is kind of the same. So they got to find some way to force people to upgrade. Okay, either way, Apple is looking at $10 billion plus in collective action lawsuit settlements, either for lying about iPhone battery longevity or for secretly sabotaging customers' products in order to force them to upgrade. Okay, second ethical issue, highly paid execs. Apple execs, on average, make more than any other execs in America. The CEO is routinely the highest paid CEO in America, making $700 to $900 million per year, including stock options. Okay, just by comparison, HBU's entire endowment is about $70 million. Right, so Tim Cook could buy 10 to 12 HBUs each year. Okay, that's a lot of money. Critics allege that executive overpayment steals money from shareholders. Apple's response has been that its executive salaries also lead to lower turnover rates. In defense of high executive salaries, Tim Cook doesn't go elsewhere because Apple pays him so much. And maybe he does add a lot of value to the company with the decision making. It's a hard job, right? He does a lot. But is it really this much, I guess, is the question. Okay, could it be $150 million and they pay the workers in Shenzhen a little bit more? Something to think about. Let's look at the big scandal, Foxconn and Apple's treatment of their developing world workers. Apple outsources its dirty work. They want to be able to tell American investors and capital providers that they treat their employees well, so they have their supplier companies do their dirty work. Concerns increased in early 2012 due to an article published in the New York Times. A 2012 audit performed by the Fair Labor Association found that workers routinely received insufficient overtime pay and suggested that workplace accidents are common. Living conditions for workers cramped and crowded. Long working hours, underpaid workers, conditions so bad that suicide prevention measures had to be taken. Suicide nets have been set up outside of all Apple factories and worker dorms. So many people were jumping. Apple is monitoring the situation. Okay, quick SWOT analysis. Strong brand image. Again, iconic branding. It's something that everybody the world over can recognize. High profit margins. This company makes 50 cents on the dollar for every iPhone they sell. Okay, that's pure profit for them. Their profit margins are enormous at Apple. When you buy an Apple product, you are paying substantially more, like a lot more, for an amount of computing power that you could get for a much cheaper price, from a competitor. Opportunities, rising demand for smart gadgets, very innovative company. The cool gadgets that they come up with are just unreal. Okay, very, very creative and innovative. I've mentioned that iPhones basically do the same thing as iPhones used to do. Maybe wearables are a way for them to innovate now, but the innovation treadmill at Apple seems to have slowed down a bit. Threats, competitors' products are cheaper, as I've mentioned. So it's a mixed bag. Okay, a very innovative, creative, extraordinary corporate leader as a company. At the same time, they've been built on the backs of workers who've been exploited for sure, and other kinds of questionable practices like the throttling. Questions or comments about this case, or reflections? Anybody?
Would you say that Apple is an unethical company from what we've just seen?
Sure. It's hard to make a global assessment, like ethical or unethical, for a company that's so multifaceted. I would say it is a company that has engaged in a number of unethical practices over the years. Now, Apple does a lot of good. Well, like they help out with housing, make affordable housing in California. So they help with that. Yeah. Now, arguably, they've done that by exploiting Chinese workers. So they can do that good by doing bad. I don't know. But yeah, here's another thing. So like the smartphones, I know that there's a lot of criticism of our smartphones these days, but golly, the communications stuff that we can get as a result of Apple's innovation is extraordinary. It's just amazing what we can do. So I guess that's good. I mean, I can chat with my parents anytime, or they're in another city, or friends from across the country anytime I want.
And they also have the messaging is also very convenient. There's a lot of
For sure.
products that Android has doesn't allow that. But you can't, unless you have some sort of data or whatnot, you can't communicate with an Android tablet, with an Android phone that has
Sure.
data. You can do that with Apple products.
They make it easier to connect with their own products, without a doubt. Look, guys, I know there's a lot of criticism coming around about smartphone addiction and how all the big tech companies are in it just to addict us all to their devices, and they are, that's true. But you can use these technologies for good, and they can be used in ways that honestly bring a much higher quality of life to us. So I'd say that's a good thing that Apple has done. And yes, a lot of bad has come with it because I think the stats show that your average teenager is now on a device 60 plus hours a week, which is kind of startling. Like, that's pretty scary if that's the case. Yeah, last comment for the day.
How old is your oldest child?
How old is my oldest child? 5 years old.
Okay.
She will not have a smartphone, by the way, for a long, long time.
Good.
No, these execs for these companies, like, they don't let their own children use their own products, actually. So, like, they don't let the social media execs don't let their kids get on social media. The Apple execs don't let their kids use iPhones. Okay, we'll let that be that for the day. If you have any questions about the exam, please email